FootTheBall Originals. Today we are kicking off the interview, and what better way to start the first episode by looking into the transfer market. One of the craziest transfer market that has been happening for many years. Lionel Messi has left Barcelona and gone to PSG. Sergio Ramos left Real Madrid and gone to PSG. Jack Grealish bought by Manchester City for £100 million. And if Lionel Messi was not enough, lo and behold, Cristiano Ronaldo has left Juventus and gone back to Manchester United. But Harry Kane could not make his move to Manchester City. Kylian Mbappe is still stuck at PSG because the Paris team refused Real Madrid's bid for 160 million euros. It's one of the busiest, craziest transfer markets ever in the history of football. And when we talk about transfer markets, we talk about super agents, right? Like Amino Raiola or Jorge Mendes. But do you know that the agents who are behind making all these deals, helping footballers get the deals in this market, are not just the super agents, they are just a minuscule portion of this crazy transfer market. Today, we have with us someone who is legendary, someone who is one of the first registered agents in England, football agents in England, way back in the 1990s. Today, we have with us Clifford Bloxham, a man who is not just a legendary agent, he was earlier a tennis player, but also he's the senior vice-president of Octagon, the agency which has handled in the past players like Patrick Viera and Frank Lampard, and handles some of the biggest names in football in the world right now. Clifford, welcome to the interview.
Let's start off with the transfer market is a bit mad after these international tournaments. So what do you think about the upcoming season? How excited are you, and which players do you think are going to make a big move?
Blimey, there's three good questions. So just quickly to say on the introduction, thank you so much, and I'm really privileged to be able to speak with you guys. And I would say that you gave me a lot of compliments in terms of what I've done, but very much I've always been part of a team. So we have a motto that none of us is as smart as all of us. So very much it's been an Octagon thing, and we've I've been worked across the athletes that you've talked about, but in more or less involved, but always always as part of a team. But to answer your question or questions. It's you're right. Big tournaments always create a lot of interest for players. I think this will be an exceptional window in that clubs they're thinking we're coming out of the pandemic and hopefully financially things will look better. But a lot of clubs are also struggling historically from a very tough 2 years. So I think that you'll see big numbers talked, but I think how those deals are structured may be different to normal. I can't see many clubs paying a huge upfront fee. So even if the fee is big, I would say a big proportion of it is going to be spread over a period of time, probably more so than ever before. And I think that you'll see clubs really spending time. They would have spent a lot of time making their decisions if they're going to spend a lot of money. They can't afford to make mistakes. Also, there's also the model that says you don't necessarily always have to spend the most money, but you need to spend it the smartest, really. But there's also a consideration that they still have spent a lot of money. So it's not like a club like Manchester City have been able to do it without a big investment, but you may go for someone that's slightly younger, slightly less proven, and you're taking more risk, but you're spending maybe 50% less. Or the other way is you take someone who's slightly older and a lower perceived value and sell-on value, etc. But again, you're probably taking a risk. So I think, but to answer your question, I think it's going to be a very exciting summer. To be honest, every transfer window is, because a lot of deals may or may not happen, but a lot of things are talked about. And I think what is interesting when you look at football over the years, that you mentioned that I've been involved with the game for a long time, it's everything around the game has grown so dramatically. So the game is still, thankfully, the same, pretty much the same on the pitch. You know, styles have changed a little bit, fitness levels are higher, etc. Diet is better, but it's still the same game. But everything around it has changed. I know there's a famous story that the England team before the World Cup final in 1966, the night before, they went out for a meal in the restaurant down the road, and stayed at a local hotel. You can't imagine where things are now compared to that. So, so I think it's, yeah. And so with that, it becomes, every transfer window now is a massive opportunity for people to talk more about football. It's just become so non-stop.
Clifford, you mentioned how things have changed, right? And I think that's so fascinating. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, when did it change? Your experience, what changed that deal?
Well, I would say it depends. So if you take the agency side of the business, the biggest change is the number of agents. So, as I say, when I started, there was, say, 25 agents, of which maybe 6 of those were making a big. It was exclusively what they did, and they made a good living. And then a lot of the others, it was, it was a part of what they did, but they weren't making lots of money. And I think what has changed now is, if I'm right, I think in the UK alone, there's over 2,000 agents registered. So the competition is very high. With increased numbers, the standards drop. So I would say the more, that doesn't mean there's been another 1,800 or 1,000, nearly 2,000 great agents added. There's just been a lot of agents added, and it's like any industry. You'll get people who are very good at what they do, and you'll get some people in the middle, and then you'll get a lot of people who are pretty average. And that's what comes with having, big numbers. And I don't know, I haven't done the maths off the top of my head. But if you say there's over 2,000 agents, then that means there's not enough Premier League players to go around that each one of them has got one of them. Yeah. And so then you answer the question is, if you haven't represented a Premier League player, how can you do that? Because everything will be a surprise. Everything is new. You're practicing. And then if you say on an international team, there's 11 starters, 20 or 23, say, in the squad. If you haven't represented someone who's playing internationally, how do you know what happens when they get to play in the Euros, or when they win the World Cup or something? So then if you take, there's only 23 English players, for example, who are having international experience, and you divide that by 2,000. That means there's an awful lot of people who are practicing as they go along, and I know you're probably aware that FIFA are looking to reintroduce the agents exam next year, and it's not an easy exam. It's difficult if someone hasn't been to have a study, in their young good days. It's hard to pass. Of agents dropping again, not to how it used to be, but it will probably go down to around 400 or 500, I would imagine. And then also probably a big change, probably for the worse, in my opinion, was when family members were allowed to be paid agents' fees. And I'm not saying that a family member can't be a great agent, because they can, but I would say that they're more valuable being a father or a dad than a brother than being an agent, because they need fathers and brothers as well as they need agents, and it's good to separate the two. The other problem you see is if a family member is being paid the agent's fee, how does that work internally within a family? Do they share it? Does he keep all of it or she keep all of it? And you can see where it creates problems within families, and that's not a healthy thing for the player or to be honest, the industry. So I would say
that's a very important.
Yeah, that would be a good thing for FIFA to bring back in.
Right. I found that your particular point about the increase in the number of agents very interesting. So, of course, the influx of money in the game is a major reason behind that. But do you think there is a glamorization of the profession as well? Like the likes of Mino Raiola, Jonathan Barnett, they are on the front page of the newspapers more than the players they represent. So, do you think that is a reason why a normal person thinks like they want to be an agent, because such has been the glamorization and personalization of the profession that people think players second, agents first? Do you think that can be a reason?
Totally. I think there's very few industries where there's no barrier to entry and you need no formal qualification, and you could make such high amounts of money so quickly. I don't think there's any other industry that I know of. It's a unique industry because so much of it is based on relationships. Yeah. So relationships are very important, but it's part of being an agent. It's not all of it. I mean, one of the things we always say is we don't intend to be the player's best friend. We want to be their career managers, and there's a difference. And also, one of the myths in football is often the myth has been that the clubs pay the agents. But the reality is every penny that doesn't go to the player, it's the player's money as well. It's just how much money the club chooses to pay. The club only has one budget. Whether they use that for the transfer fee, paying the agent, paying the player's salary, they don't really care, because they've got to go fit within their budget. How that's split is pretty irrelevant. But the player doesn't often see it like that. They feel like there's this secret pot of money that pays agents, and it doesn't come out their bank account. But it does. They just don't. That's one area where I think why it makes it easy for agents to work so quickly, because the player may think, well, even if someone's not very good, they're not charging me I'm not paying them for doing my deal. So why not? But if they realise they're paying someone, £100,000 or £1,000, then they're going to think, if they see it come out their bank account, they're going to think, well, what did I get for that? Was it good value?
That's a very important point you're making, right? The football world is divided, talking about agents versus agencies and super agents. We have Mino Raiolas of the world, the Jorge Mendes of the world. Jorge Mendes is actually accused. He's almost running a club like the Wolves, right? And a couple of other clubs. Now, how does that pan out in a footballing world? Is there a control? Apparently he has, all we see is that he has investment into Wolves, as well as, he is getting all the players into Wolves. It's just one agent with one club. How does that work out? How is that affecting the game of football?
It's a good question. I think the single biggest challenge is that the governments around the world and typically the tax authorities, if you look at the concept of the dual representation contract, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that concept is completely foreign in any other form of negotiation. How can you work for both parties at the same time? If you went to your bosses and said, we're going to do a deal, we've got someone who's working for us and them, but they're going to get us the best deal, no one would believe, and the same with, we've got, lawyers look at contracts and say, well, we've never seen where you can work for both parties at the same time. So that won't continue, in my opinion. But I do think the good thing is that as the game has got more important, not more important, grown. You know, it's certainly a game of the people. You know, we've seen that with the Super League, the reaction. It belongs to the people, and governments are realizing that you can see politicians, you know, they always support a team, or there's politically it's a very powerful sport. But if they're going to champion the sport, and given how much time, you know, and money is going to the game, the standards will improve. So I think you'll start to see less of areas that could be a conflict of interest, and I think you'll see more regulation. And I think you're seeing at the moment in the UK where the government has threatened to appoint a regulator. In fact, there's an inquiry going right now. But I think the football industry will try very hard to police their own business, you know, their own sport, without intervention from the government. But this is probably the last. The Super League was the last chance saloon for football to be seen to be a good governance as an industry. So yeah, I think things will change.
Do you think that this big round with Super League, come back to Super League? Is there a chance? All of this
I think football will continue to evolve. You know, and so it may well, but for that to happen, everyone has to be together, and that's, you know, I can't see that happening for many years. But will it happen?
Axel is itching to ask you a question. But I think Wimbledon, yes, you're right. Wimbledon has changed over the years, apart from the strawberries and cream, I guess.
Yeah.
But I was also a quick question that I really wanted to ask you was that, you know, did the Neymar deal actually change at all? Did families getting involved kind of got into the focus from then on? Or it has been a trend of these third-party agreements that happen, which primarily happens in South America? Or is this a problem overall across the world whenever contracts are being signed, and that's a problem you're facing in Europe as well? My second question would be, to finish on this, at least on these controversial topics, is that how do you, what is this inquiry which is happening in England right now? What's going to happen? What's the end result out of an inquiry that's happening into all these dealings by agents?
So, and I think the government, and then I think also they'll look very closely at families being able to receive agents' fees. So I don't think that will happen straight away, but I think in the long term it will happen, partly by the reduction of the number of agents. Anyway, it will reduce the percentage of family members who are agents, because it's just, you know, it would be just the same as we're just reducing agents, and a proportion of those, probably as many as, I'm guessing probably 20%, if at least 20% of, and often some of the bigger ones, you know, have family members. And again, I'm not saying the family can't have a massive impact onto a player's career and shouldn't be overseeing it. It's just it's something that doesn't sit right when you're paying your dad or your brother your salary from your money. You know, it changes the nature of that relationship. I think it will happen quickly, actually. I think the pandemic and where it's going is top of the agenda in a lot of sports, and you're seeing it at the moment in England in rugby. They've brought in the salary cap, and will that come in football? Quite probably. And I think a lot of people will in football will be looking at a salary cap. You know, and again, it works in the American team sports, and it's just money. Yeah, money and where it's going and how it's being spent is going to be much more scrutinised, in my opinion, going forward.
So You put it really well. You had some great insights as to how the industry has changed from the one you got into. Now, I'm really interested in the human aspect of the story. Like, what pushed you to get into this particular industry?
It's a really good question. So, a lot of people, I think, are failed isn't the right word. Are sportsmen who didn't reach a level where they could make a living. And I fit into that category. So I was a tennis player that played to a good level. I think I was 790 in the world. So good, but not great, and certainly not good enough to make a living. So then I think from my side, then I looked at what could I do I was fortunate to go to American University on a tennis scholarship. So I ended up getting a degree, which probably I wouldn't have got if I hadn't played my sport. So I was grateful for that. But it was then when I finished and realized, you know what, I'm not going to make a living as a tennis player. It's helped me get a degree. What can I do with the knowledge I have from tennis and my degree that I still enjoy? And it was the idea of working in sport, but also working with people, with sportsmen and women, really appealed to me. And when I started, it was a small industry. So we were in the UK. I think we were 3 people, and we're now about 180. And I think globally we were about 50 people, and we're now about 900 people. So it was very small when I started, and it's grown a lot. So I was lucky to get a job because there really wasn't that many companies. You know, as I say, there was maybe 25 football agents, say. To be honest, when I started, they weren't registered, so it was even less. But there was probably, I don't know, global agencies working in sports management. There's probably only three companies. And so there wasn't a lot of jobs. And then it was... and I've always say to people who want to get into the industry is it actually doesn't matter where you get in, as long as you get in. Once you can get in, you can move around. But it's a very small industry really, and it's just getting in and, you know, making an impression. But once you're in, people stay in our industry forever pretty much, because there's always a need, because there's not actually that many people in it, because it's a small industry. So yes. So personally, that was how I got involved. And football's always appealed to me. It wasn't the company was founded really on the strength of tennis and basketball was our original 2 sports, where we really made a mark. And John McEnroe, Steffi Graf were 2 of our early clients. But it was we grew very quickly, and football, we've always played a very big role on the marketing side of football with the brands. So, for instance, at the moment we're working with the likes of MasterCard and Expedia, Hotels.com, Deliveroo, Mars, all big spenders in soccer. That's always been the case, and we've always been a leading agency in that area. And but the player representation side, I'd say over the years we've had a lot of work with a lot of great players, and you mentioned the likes of Frank Lampard and Patrick Viera, Daniel Sturridge. But it's we've in any sport we've always gone for quality, not quantity.
I had a question. So you mentioned earlier that once you get into the industry, you're in and you can move around. So what was the moment for you where you felt that you are in the industry now? Like, what was your breakthrough moment, and you felt like, yeah, this is it. This is what I can do.
So I would say the breakthrough for me was being lucky to join. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, that I've worked for the same guy, Phil Di Picciato, since I started. So it's 35 years. He was one of the original founders of Octagon. But there's no accident. He's the president of Octagon, and he was very good. So I think that was my breakthrough. Ronaldo, the original Ronaldo from Brazil's deal with him was probably one of their biggest paying deals, and that would have gone through. And so ultimately, the same guys we might be dealing in tennis or in basketball are the same guys who we would be dealing with in football for the very top guys. If you go right down to the bottom, the owner of Nike won't know the name of the guy who's playing for Portsmouth when wearing their boots. It just doesn't happen. But he'll know the top 20 athletes they have globally that's contributing the most money. So that's that. I think if you're fortunate to work at a company where the level of your clients can be very high.
Clifford, you're talking about Ronaldo. I cannot what was the experience of the original Ronaldo? How did you guys manage him? How do you compare him with newer age footballers? Because at that time he was the best in the world, right? So tell us a little bit about managing the original Ronaldo.
It was the beginning of the first real global superstar. So for example, Pelé. You can say, I always say, first there was Sir Stanley Matthews, and then there was Pelé, and then now and probably Ronaldo was pretty much the next global, the first rock and roll superstar. George Best, obviously, people talk about him, but there just wasn't the money in the game, and I think Ronaldo was, I think he did amazingly well to achieve what he did, considering where he, how big a deal he was. He was, and again, there wasn't others to learn from. It's easy to, if you're smart, let's say you're a very good young player right now, you would look at, let's say you're English, because I'm most familiar with that, but you'd look at, and you're 18, 19 years old, you'd look at Raheem Sterling, you look at Daniel Sturridge, who had a lot of fame at a young age. So what happened? How did their career pan out? Where did they end up? How have they developed? Jesus is a good example at Man City. He's a young guy. He can go big places. So he's looking at the Agueros and he's looking at where did they go? For Ronaldo, the original Ronaldo, there really wasn't that many role models to look at because he was the first in my mind of, there was the controversy or the intrigue around the World Cup where they, there was all the thing about Nike influencing this and picking him. In the previous World Cups, those sort of conversations would never be happening because it just wasn't, no one even crossed their mind. So I think it was, so I think the people who worked with him at the time, it was about setting a new pathway, really. So you had to realize that we can't really look back at what's been done before. We need to think about what's happening. Where's the game going? Where's he going? What are the new challenges? And I'd say social media now is a massive challenge because it's incredibly powerful if you've got a lot of followers. But how do you use that well? What are the concerns? What are the risks? How does that relate to a club? Because you potentially have a player who could be selected based on his social media following because the clubs are making more money, and that's crazy.
About the original Ronaldo Nazario, and you also said how social media plays a huge part in terms of the finances and everything, right? So Cristiano Ronaldo, right? He's a great player. One of the greatest possible, but he's also the greatest player and the greatest personality ever on social media. Just touched about 300 million fans on Instagram, the first one to do so. Has been. So does it help social media for a good player's career, or does it not help?
And that's new. That 20 years ago, we did we had a research in football called Passion Drivers. So why was a fan of football? And it was never, the athlete was never high on that agenda. It was their loyalty to the club was was by far the biggest driver. And then within that, you'd have different types of people. So you'd have the guys who it was their social life, so that's what the club meant to them. They shared a commonality with their friends, and that's how they made their friends. They spent time down the pub watching together. You might have others who it was their escape time, like the person who was the fan of Man U liked watching the game on his own in a room. That was his special moment or her special moment. So, but what you've got now is people are fans of the player, and whatever club they go to, all that stuff has gone now, and it's the personality of the player, which is good, because ultimately, I think if you're a sport, you don't mind how fans connect to that sport, whether it's through the player or the club, or, to be honest, the story, the industry as a whole, the game as a whole, as long as they connect with the game.
So, what I found really interesting is when you stay in the industry for 35 years, then adaptability has to be the name of the game, right? So, how has Octagon successfully navigated mainly the digital pivot? Like, as you said, Cristiano Ronaldo influencing 300 million people on Instagram. That wasn't the case when you joined the company, right? So, how has Octagon successfully navigated that digital pivot and come out of the other side still one of the premier representation agencies in all of sports?
So my own personal learning of social media and the power of it was through two very different athletes. So one was Anna Kournikova, which is a well-known tennis player. Yeah. She was the first superstar of female tennis, and really the first digital superstar, but before digital existed. So it was the website. So she was the first to monetize a website. She had millions of followers on a website. It's not the same as digital, but it allowed us to learn. We actually learned, can you monetize it? Can you sell product? Or is it about helping to tell the athlete's story? And so when we got to digital, we'd already learned a lot from her website, and the same with a sailor that was very famous at the time, but there was a British sailor called Dame Ellen MacArthur, and she was the fastest. She set the world record for sailing around the world on her own single-handedly, and that was for a man or a woman. So at the time, she was a big deal because it was seen as a very much a male thing to do, to break the world record on sail around the world on your own. But this was a lady who was 5'6" who broke the world record fastest. But what she did, and this was one where she was the inspiration, and we were just, in a way, we were part of her support team. It wasn't our initiative, but she, Ellen put live video cams on her boat. So she had a website and she had live video cams, and she would do a broadcast on her website each night, like a diary. And she would say things like, it's going to be very rough tonight. And she would only, I don't know if you're aware of this sort of thing, but she only slept for maybe 20 or 30 minutes. If you're sailing on your own around the world, you don't sleep for more than 20 or 30 minutes at a time. So she would have a night, but it didn't mean she was going to sleep all night. It just meant the night was coming. And she would say, it's going to be rough. I'm hoping I'm still here in the morning. And people were thinking, cool, that's cool. Who wouldn't want to look at the camera to see how rough it is or how bad it is? So I think she started off her journey with maybe 200 followers and finished with 3 million. And it was at a time where very few people had more than 50,000 followers on a website. And we learned a lot, So I think I'd say how do we adapt is firstly being aware of the trends and also being ready to learn, but also getting yourself in a position where you are at the forefront, because the company you keep is at the forefront of whatever's happening. Right. So if for example, if you're a top sportsman, let's take the current Cristiano Ronaldo. If he shows up in a country or at an event, let's say he's doing an event for Sony, for sure the president of Sony or the managing director of Sony is going to be there, the prime minister probably. So a big athlete brings out reaches people that other people, you never get to meet them, never get to see them. And that's the power of sport. And then it's a question of, from our point of view, these opportunities that our clients create, we need to learn from them too, partly because we need to be ready to teach the next generation of that learning. But it also has helped Octagon stay at the top.
You mentioned about Steffi Graf. You took me back to my days. My hero, Boris Becker, Steffi Graf, had to be. But talk about Anna Kournikova, right? I mean, kind of changed the game altogether, right?
Yeah.
And brought in a different kind of a revolution. Maybe the first digital revolution where players were themselves out on a website, right?
Yeah.
How have we come from that today? But having said that, also you talked about Cristiano Ronaldo, right? So I must not miss this opportunity to ask you, Clifford, in between the interview, who's your GOAT, Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Well, I think if you want my view is they make each other great, so you just got to thank. It's the same right now in tennis. You've got to thank the fact that Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic have come at the same time, and the same for Ronaldo and Messi. I think they've made each other better. So if I had a favourite because they're so great, it's only because the other guy helped make them great. So you can't have Messi without Ronaldo, in my opinion. Because they undoubtedly have pushed each other to incredible length. Personally, I personally would go for Messi only because it's less physically obvious why he's great, and I find that fascinating. Where Ronaldo, it's obvious why he's great. He's an amazing athlete. The way he jumps is phenomenal physically. With Messi, it's like there's a little bit more mystique and a bit more magic, and that doesn't make him any better. It just makes it it's more interesting because of the mystique. With Ronaldo, you've got an incredible athlete to start with who works every day, gives 1,000%. So why he's so good is, in my mind, isn't as obvious. Is more obvious than why is Messi so good.
Which 5 or 10 players are you most excited about, who you represent, or maybe across Europe at this point?
The five people or 5 players. God, that's a great question. Well, it depends on the sport. Am I allowed to pick sports, or am I?
We're talking about football here.
Okay, all right. So football, I would say. God. Well, put it this way, I'm very excited about the fact that the young players are getting an opportunity sooner. So I would say any of those young guys that are setting, so Mbappe and to an extent people like Sterling and the younger guys who are getting the opportunity earlier and taking responsibility earlier, like Jesus, that type. Those excite me because they've still got a lot of years to get better, and often it's rare that such young players get the responsibility so quickly. So, and I think more coaches are embracing young players early. So for me, it's, if we're looking at the Euros, it's some of the young guys who are setting such standards at such a early age because they've got another 10 years to get better, and that's frightening. So, and I'd say, historically, players were a little bit older before they really got going. We're definitely, and that's a credit a bit to the clubs, more professional, they're better at helping the youngsters transfer, physical, mental, all that sort of stuff is better. You know, they're more mature at a young age, and also the raw ingredients. So now, if you're not quick, forget playing. You know, you used to have certain positions where they say you could read the game and you didn't have to be quick. Forget it. You know, so speed is number one. Athleticism, that gets you into the party, and then it's okay. Well, what else do you bring? You know, it's not good enough to be quick or read the game. You've got to do it all, and you've got to do it at a young age. So, yeah, it's I think it's exciting.
So, I mean, top 5 players in Octagon's kitty, football players, rising ballers, under 18s that you are excited about, in the future.
Yeah, I would never name just 5. So basically, from our side, if we're not excited about our clients, we shouldn't work with them. So, you know, I know it's a bit of a diplomatic answer, but I would never single out 5 because if we're not excited and we don't believe in them, and you never know, honestly, you don't know who's going to be the best. I can give you one example is when we signed Daniel Sturridge, we were recommended 3 players of very much the same standard as him at the same time, and we were fortunate to sign all 3. And one of them ended up playing 5 games in the Premier League. One of them never started in the Premier League and ended up in amateur football within 2 years. So it's so hard to tell football. It's probably the hardest sport, I would say. Whereas, again, if you look at other sports, but you know, you can tell much easier in a lot of other sports, but not football. Who comes through that age group between probably 17 and 21, 22, that is incredibly difficult to tell. And anyone who tells you they know is they're not they're lucky, because it's definitely not the case. I mean, the person who recommended us was very good. They knew what they were doing, and they got 2 out of 3 were wrong. And
top five transfer deals you are looking forward to personally in football this summer?
Top 5 what? Teams?
Top 5 transfer deals.
Top 5 transfer. Oh my gosh. Wow. Obviously, you're interested in the big ones. You know, they're not.
Okay, let's change it. Which is the top 5 transfers you are personally looking at across the world? I mean, top 5 leagues in Europe. I mean, which is that?
Well, you obviously, from a UK point of view, Harry Kane is a big talking point. I think it's interesting.
The structuring of the deals will change. That's what you are referring to. I think Gabriel Jesus, you Octagon represents Gabriel Jesus, and I think he's such a brilliant example of how a player has come out of Brazil, right? And I mean, from abject poverty to now where he is, and I think it speaks a lot about the player, his character. How do you see Gabriel Jesus? Because you work with him closely.
Well, again, it's, I don't do very much at all. It's our Brazilian office, but I would say he's learning at a great school. So he's a smart guy. He's in a good place. If you want to become better, which he obviously does, where he is great. Now you can say, okay, does he want to play more games? Everyone wants to play, more, but the reality is you're better. There's nowhere better to be, and he's enjoying it. So I would say he's good at. There's a very good saying that it was a jockey. We had a representative jockey who didn't lose. He was the number 1 jockey in Britain for 18 years, AP McCoy, and he said he was just talented enough to realise that he had to work harder than everybody else. And I think that's something you see from Jesus, is that he's talented, but he realised the talent is he realised he needs to learn to become better, and that's what he's been doing. It's a great apprenticeship. So I would say he's a good role model in the sense that he left Brazil and he's improved himself as a person, but his football is improving, and he's, he's not, it wasn't the end game where, he wants to be better than he is, which is, guys, I appreciate your time, and it's been fun talking with you. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.